I'm going to add a pair of doors to the bottom part of the cabinet. And again, to begin, I don't have to measure anything or lay out anything. I can take the rectangle, snap from a corner to the midpoint. This gives me a rectangle that's going to establish the outside dimensions of the door. I'll just move this face out in front of the cabinet where I can work on it. I'll adjust my point of view so I can get to it. In the components window, I've previously saved a profile for a cope and stick pattern for the stiles. Now these are the components in the model, and from the components window I can navigate to the folder that I have the component I need in. So here's a profile of my cope and stick pattern. You can find this kind of pattern on manufacturers' websites. That'll give you the exact dimensions of it. And it's the kind of thing that's worth saving for later on in your components. Now I have this aimed the wrong way, so I'm going to use flip along to reverse the direction of it. And then I'm going to move it into position at the bottom edge of this face. I want my door stile to be 2 1/4 inches wide, so I'll take a quick measurement and see if that's what I have. And I do. So this is a component. I'll explode it, zoom out a little bit, then I'll just use push-pull to make a stile the right length. When it's in place, I'll make it a component. And I'll make sure the replace selection with component box is checked. To make another version on the other side of the door, I'll just make a copy. Get it in place, flip it along. Then I'll move it back to the edge of the door. So that gives me 2 stiles. They're both components. They're both the exact size of the door opening. The face that established the size was just a temporary convenience. So at this point I can delete that. Now I need to add rails, which are going to be like the stile components, except they're going to have another detail on the end. To begin with, I'll just bring in another stile component, and I'll use the rotate tool to turn it 90 degrees. Then I'll move it along, and I'll line up this corner just to establish the overall length. Now before I go too far, I want to make this unique, and then I can edit it safely without changing any of the other stile components. And I'll use push-pull and I'm just making sure that the entire length goes from groove to groove. When I'm sure about that, I'll click on the new component. I'll go up to the entity info box and I'll change the name there. You can see that the new component has appeared in the components window. Putting the cope pattern on the ends of the rail will be easier if I have it reversed in position. So I'm going to move it down to the bottom of the door, and then I'll want to flip it. Now, because this is started life as a style, flipping it on the blue axis picks up the definition from the style component. And components have their own orientation, and that's the direction I want it. So I'll just pull this off away from the door for a few minutes so I can work on it. Then I'm going to find my profile again and drag a copy of that into the drawing. Again, I want to flip it over so that it's pointed in the right direction. What I want to work with is actually a negative impression of this profile. So I'm going to explode the component. Then with a pencil tool, I'll draw a few lines on the opposite side. And the size here is arbitrary. I just want enough to create a face, and then I can erase the original face. Now I'll pull this up to 2 1/4 inches to match the height of what I have. Now I'll zoom out. I'll select all of this and I'll move it into position next to my rail component. I'm going to move it down so that the corners match, and then I want to slide the end of the tongue into the end of the groove. I also want to make a copy of this on the other end. So I have the move tool engaged. I'll just hit Control. I'll grab a point on the end, bring it down. I'm going to zoom in to see I've got it placed correctly, and then I'm going to flip this along the red direction. At this point, I want to explode the rail component. Exploding the component returns it to being lines and faces. And I want to change my point of view so I can see what's going on a little better. I also want to give myself a little more space to work. So I'm going to just move this away from the other parts of the door. Now that these are all lines and faces and they're all selected, I'm going to right click on that, go to Intersect, and Intersect Selected. That will combine all of this geometry where it intersects, making sure I have lines there. So there's some extra groups of lines I don't need, and I can enclose those with a bounding box and simply delete them. And I can come around, do the same thing on the other end. Also want to take a look at the back of this, and I see that in making it a component, I don't have a face on the back side. So I'll just draw a line, and that establishes a face. Sometimes when you remove lines or copy lines, the program doesn't always pick up what you're trying to do, and you can lose a face or not include one when you mean to. From here, I just want to zoom in, orbit to get a look at the end, and then erase the lines that I don't need. And this will take a few minutes, and I'll need to think about what goes away and what stays. Essentially what I'm doing is the same thing I'd be doing in the shop, making a negative cutout on the cope end that's going to match the stick profile. And if I make a mistake, Control Z will back up a step and return what I'm doing. In here it's not quite clear what is going on, so I turn around and I can see I've erased a line I should have kept. So when I draw that back in, the faces reappear. And I'll just reverse those so everything looks good. I'll zoom out to take a look, and then orbit around so I can work on the other end of the rail. And I just want to get a position where I can see what I'm doing. Take the eraser tool and remove the extra lines. And I'll zoom and move around as I work. Try and make sure I'm not leaving out something that I want to keep. And in this case I did remove a line I shouldn't have, lost the end of the tongue, but replacing the line makes the faces reappear. So when you do make an error like that in SketchUp, you don't need to panic, you don't need to assume you have to redraw something. Most of the time you can come back in, find what the mistake was, and replace the missing parts. Now if I needed to, I could use undo or Control Z to go clear back to the beginning. But I've managed to create the piece I want to create. A couple things that need to be cleaned up. Here's a face that needs reversed. And another one. So when I have it the way I want it, I'll surround it with a bounding box, right click, and redefine the component. This already exists in the database. When I click create, the pop-up window asks me if I'm sure I want to do that, and I say yes. So now I have a rail that's exactly the right size that I can move in position and it fits with the door. It's the right size, the profiles are an exact match, and I can just make a copy to place at the top. So I'll pan around to get a good view, click on the rail component, I'll just make a copy, hold down the control key so I see the plus sign next to the move tool, place it up at the top of the drawer, flip it on its axis, and then bring it back into the exact position. So with that, I have 4 parts of the door completed. There's one more. Now I need to make a raised panel. Let's zoom in for a minute and take a look at what's going on with the door and what I need to be able to make the panel. If you see on the profile, the groove is a little bit deeper than the edge of the stile. When I make my panel, I want to leave some room for it to expand and contract. So if the edge of the panel lines up to here, I'll be in good shape. Conveniently, that makes this corner where the stile and rail join a good target. So I'm going to come back out and I'm going to make a rectangle from that intersection down to this intersection. This is going to be the extent of the raised panel that I want to make. And I can click on this face. With the move tool, I can take the whole face away from the rest of the door frame. And now it's in a location where I can work on it. To give the panel thickness, as well as shape the edge around it, I'm going to use a component that I made and saved earlier. Here's a profile of the panel. Now that I have the component facing the right way, I'm going to pick it up with the move tool, bring it over and just snap it on the edge of the panel. And now I'm going to come away just to leave a little extra space in between the two. So I have the profile I want. I have the panel to define the path. Now all I need to do is extrude the profile around the edge. The first thing to do is explode. Now I can select the panel, pick up the Follow Me tool, and then just click on the face. So even though the perimeter wasn't connected to the profile I was extruding, it made the right shape and the right size. So now I can select, delete the panel that I used to start with. As I come around, this box is the edge of the original profile component. I don't need these lines anymore, so I'll just select and delete them. And I'll come around the back, and I'll do the same thing back here. Now you may notice 4 little dots showing up. If I go to the View menu, turn on Face Style X-Ray, I can see that I've left some remnants of that little cutout inside. And just to keep things neat and tidy, I'm going to go ahead and remove those, just so I don't have any odd bits of geometry floating around that may cause problems later on. So I'll turn the X-ray view off, zoom back out, and there's my panel. Now I just need to connect the panel to the door. I know the panel's the right size, but I don't have it in the right position yet. That could be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to work from what I do know and take this in a couple of steps. First, I'm going to back up, and I'm going to make the panel a component. This will be door, raised panel. The box is checked. I'll click Create. Now that I have the panel a component, I'm going to move it close to the position I want it to be in. So I can zoom in the Move command, zoom back out, then zoom in again, and this is the intersection that I started with. But I want to actually have the panel inside the groove. So I can come up here and use this as a reference point and move this back in stages using existing points that I know about as my reference. And when I look down, I can come in and see that I've got the panel inside the groove. Before I put the door in the cabinet, I'm going to click out in space to deselect the panel and just take a look around to make sure everything's okay. And I can see that when I made the styles, I lost the face on the back edge. Now this doesn't mean I have to start over. It doesn't mean that I've ruined anything. I'll just select the style component. I'll right click to open it for editing. And most of the time when a face comes up missing, Drawing a single line will make it reappear. And that takes care of fixing the style. I now have a completed door, and I'm going to make the door assembly a nested component. That way I can work on the door as one object, and that'll make things easier. And now that the door is a component, I can click on it, move it into the place in the face frame of the cabinet. Now to get a second door, I only need to make a copy of this one and bring it on over. I'm going to go ahead and flip this, even though it won't change the appearance any. If I come in later on and add hinges or something like that to one edge of the door, that'll automatically change it and give me a reversed copy. Adding detailed parts like this to a model is one of the places that SketchUp is very, very useful, especially compared to drafting on paper. Today we made a complete drawer and two raised panel doors. We know the exact sizes of them, and we also know the exact sizes of each and every part. For example, the rails in the doors and the panels, if you're trying to figure the size of these parts manually, there's a lot of math involved, a lot of opportunities for error. But with SketchUp, I know exactly how long this piece of wood needs to be. I didn't have to do any math. When I'm done, I can let the program show me how big it needs to be. And if I build the same style of door or the same type of drawer over and over again, I really only have to draw these components once. One of the options I have over in the Components window is to right-click and Save As. Now I can take this door assembly, save it in a library on my computer, and I'll have it available to use in a different model. And one of the advantages of having that as a component is if I do need to use it later on, I can change the size very easily, and in just a few moments I can save a great deal of time. I'll click Make Unique, and then I'll right click and select Edit Component. I'm also going to pick the rail component, make it unique, and do the same thing with the panel. This way the other parts in my model won't change. Now to make a wider door, I can just select a rail, move it on the green axis, say 2 inches, then by editing the other components, I can stretch everything the same distance, 2 inches on the green axis. I'll do the same with the panel. And in just a few seconds, I've made a new door in a different size. And again, I can come in, I can look at an individual part, and I can let SketchUp tell me how big it is. And that is a time saver. Once again, the advantages of using SketchUp are really tremendous. And for me, one of the best parts is I know how big things are without doing a lot of math. One of the secrets to working efficiently is to snap to existing points when you can, and to copy something instead of drawing it, if that's at all possible. Earlier I talked about using an image from a router bit manufacturer's website to generate a component for the style and rail bit that I used. Thought I'd take a moment and show you just how I did that. First I went to the manufacturer's website, freudtools.com, found a bit that would work, and saved the image file from the website to my computer. Then I go to the File menu in SketchUp, click Import, navigate to find the file I need, and then click Open. This brings a copy of the photo into SketchUp, and I place it on the ground. When I first bring it in, the image is an arbitrary size, and it will change as I move the cursor around. I click to get it any size, and now I'll make it exactly the size that I want. I can see from the image that the groove should be 15/64 in thickness. I can use the tape measure tool, which we usually use to place guidelines. If I hit the control key, the plus sign disappears, and now when I click 2 points, I can type in a number, and that will resize the model. When I'm in this mode, this pop-up window appears. I click yes, and the image I've selected changes size. I can check again. I don't have snap points to hit, but I can come close with the cursor. And I'm not quite where I want to be, so I'll do that same operation again. I hit the control key to remove the plus sign, click from one point to another point, type 15/64 and hit the enter key. And that will resize the image to the size that I need. With the image the correct size, I can draw on top of it and create a pretty close rendition of the proper profile. I'll begin with a guideline that's parallel to the axis, and then I'll place my other guidelines according to the dimensions that I've been given. I'll come up 7/32 because that's the radius. I'll come down 3/16. From that lower line, I'll come up 3/4. This isn't quite lining up to the image, but it's very, very close to what the dimensions ought to be. So now I can take the pencil tool and draw along the lines I've already established with the guidelines. I know that this line should be 23/64 of an inch long, so I type in that dimension. I'll come down to where I intersect with the guideline, and then just trace over these points and hit the snap points that I want. I'm coming over 2 1/4 just as an arbitrary distance. I need a line coming down, and then I'm going to come over to this point, bring a line down, but I want to move this line just to give me another point to hit the radius from. I'm going to make a copy of it on the axis 7/32 of an inch over. Now I have 2 precise points that I can draw my arc to. That gives me the arc. I can erase this extra line, these extra lines, finally the guidelines. Now I have the profile of the molding pattern that I want. I can select all of that, right click, and make it a component. I'll call it Freud Cope and Stick. With this component, or any component, when I right click on it, one of the options in the pop-up menu is Save As. What that will do is let me save it on a file anywhere on my computer. So I can navigate the way I normally would, find a folder I want, and then place the file. So it's a good idea to establish a library in a specific location on your computer to store these kinds of components. From the Components window, I have several options of where I can store libraries or which libraries I can access. We've been using this pane and the In Model option. The other items on the menu list show me different options. If there's a library somewhere that I can't see in this list, this pane over here will open up, and open or create a local collection will help me to find those files on my computer. From this window, I can browse just as I would with any other folder on my computer. I can make a new folder from here, and that will let me find my collection of components. I can also create a collection from the components that are in the model itself. To open a collection of components for printing, you go through the same window, click Open or Create a Local Collection button, and then navigate to where the file is stored on your computer.